Hello, welcome to the live stream. The background for all these videos is to help you, help any listener, and also help myself stabilize in the state of nirvana. I've been talking to you about the question of identity and if there are better ways in figuring out who we are. Of course, the method is quite simple to observe our breath and to discover ourselves. But then the number of ways we could go wrong are numerous. So we need to stick to scriptures or to someone with experience, someone who will guide us. If you find a question later on and you've not joined these videos live, you can mail on the email ID shown. And if you have a question, please feel free to ask it live. It is typical for any person who undertakes this journey to have innumerable questions when the journey begins. But as you walk more and practice and observe more, uh, naturally you will have all the answers you need. Any questions that arise within you will also be accompanied by answers. That is the nature of this journey. And when you do not know an answer, if you have sufficiently progressed, you just have to go blank. For lack of a better example, I'll I can refer to even what intellectuals of the modern age do. If you have had a lesson on Einstein, you would have read about him that when he did not find an answer, or when he was struggling with a problem for which he couldn't find an answer, he would let go of the problem and engage in something unrelated for a while. And at some other point in time, the answer would suddenly flash in his mind. That is intuition. The source of that knowledge is intelligence. A possibility just springs up in your mind. You go back, he goes back to his lab, his workplace, and verifies. Most interesting discoveries have been made in this fashion, in silence. When we call people as intelligent, we think it's their innate ability. It's the ability of that human being to connect with intelligence. But intelligence was always there, is always in the universe, and will always exist. The degree to which we connect with that intelligence differs from person to person. And the creation of the universe has the capability to connect with that intelligence. That is what happens when a person is enlightened to. He is in continuous touch with the intelligence. A person improves physically, mentally, in all the dimensions that you can think of when he gets connected with such supreme intelligence. What humans worship is also that intelligent aspect of nature. Even scriptures refer to the supreme beings as intelligent beings. For example, one of the tantras aimed at nirvana Mahanirvana is the Mahanirvana Tantra. If you look at the root mantra, it is composed of a few syllables whose meaning is that the creator, the protector, the destroyer, that is the supreme being, are timeless, are beyond the concept of time. They, which means they did exist in the past, they will exist in the future. Those timeless beings are of the form of consciousness, intelligent consciousness, Chit Swarupa. And all such beings, all that consciousness which is intelligent, is undivided. Is undivided, which means it's single. And that is what Mahanirvana Tantram refers to as the Brahman, that supreme intelligence. If you look at the teaching of Babaji, Mahatar Babaji, that one, if you have heard of Ekameva Dvitiyam, it also means there is one without a second. That same consciousness is what he refers to. If you look at religions, no matter what religion it is, the supreme being which is who is of the nature of intelligence and consciousness, is one without a second. When Hinduism or other religions or other pagan practices, ancient practices, refer to multiple gods, they are referring to beneficial energies, beneficial factors, beneficial manifestations of that undivided supreme consciousness. They're not talking about having a second to that supreme. In today's world, religion, spirituality is all very confusing. There is not much to gain by adhering to any of them or not adhering to any of them. And there isn't much to lose. What matters is you, your own self. Since you matter, yourself is what matters. Observe the self. All that you know, you need to know is yourself, and that's self realization. It's a fact that the mind is very capable. It's capable of a lot of thought, reasoning, contemplation, and cognition. It can do all that when the perception of our senses is limited to human senses. There's a limitation to the sense perception of a human being. We know that. Science is all about stretching the limitations of our sense perceptions, scientific observation. The mind can operate with only as much knowledge as it currently takes in through the senses. It doesn't even take up all the knowledge that comes through the senses. It takes up whatever it can, and that's its limitation. When you silence the mind, the observer can observe a lot more than what the mind can understand. When you have a problem, the mind is very good at tackling that particular problem. When you have a threat for the body, the mind can find ways to evade that threat. And you, as an observer, would enjoy the presence of the mind, would enjoy the actions of the mind. But when the mind is silenced, you, as an observer, will observe a lot more of the information that flows in through your senses. When that kind of information flows in through your senses, your mind will realize its limitation. You will realize the limitation of your mind. It is so feeble in comparison with the amount of information that can flow to you directly from nature. When that flow happens, it's much easier to stop the mind. But while that happens, you also feel that you're lost, you don't exist anymore, and you want to be back. There's an inclination constantly for you to be present. If you let that inclination override your interest in observation, then that inclination will assume your identity and behave like you. Let me tell you something interesting. You don't need a posture, you don't need a place, you don't need a time. You don't need a purity of the body. You don't need a purity of the mind. You don't need anything to progress spiritually other than observing your breath. You just have to dive with your breath. You don't need anything else. This is very hard to comprehend for most people. No matter in what state you are, how you are, nothing matters. If you are able to observe your breath, that's what clicks. If you are unable, no matter how well you have prepared yourself, it's useless. If you try observing your breath, and if you have any questions, you can get in touch with me. If you can stay with your breath, please do. You don't need any other guidance. The most beautiful journey that you can undertake is the journey into yourselves, riding the breath that goes in to your body. But I can tell you for sure and with experience that you can see that point where the breath that goes in becomes the breath that comes out. Depending upon how thoughtless, depending upon how much silence you can create, you will either experience it very soon. Actually, the dimension of time as it applies to our physical bodies or to the lives that we live socially in the material dimensions does not make sense in the direction of self realization. Thank you. And I'll close by saying, if you are truly interested in self realization and you have a question, let's connect in my next live session. Thank you.